Hey everyone, I'm going to go through the very first step of cell respiration, which is called glycolysis for you today. And so that's over here. This is our overview of the entire process of cellular respiration. So again, we remember our chemical equation or chemical reaction for um, cell respiration includes glucose, which is our reactant. We have oxygen, which is also a reactant, which is going to be over here in our oxidative phosphorylation. And then our products are going to be um, carbon dioxide, it's going to come out of here, and water will come out of here. And we have a bunch of ATP at the bottom that we'll get into. So this is kind of the general overview. We will be able to get to a point where we can label all these parts at the very least. And so we're going to start over here with just glycolysis. The thing to note about this is, again, if we can break down the terminology, we're going to be better off. Glyco is referring to our glucose molecule. Lysis is to split. So during this process, we're going to start with our 6-carbon glucose molecule, and that will be split into 2 3-carbon molecules known as pyruvate so that they can move on to the next step. So again, just an overview. Here's glycolysis happening. It's happening in the cytosol of our cells, so like the cytoplasm. We can see that the mitochondria is right next door for the rest of cell respiration. So here's where one of those misconceptions can be found. You could say like um, respiration happens in the mitochondria. It sure does, but actually the very first step called glycolysis occurs in the cytosol. And this step happens for any organism that goes through cell respiration. No matter what, it does not require oxygen. So early on, think way back when our very first organisms were around, and there was very low oxygen within our atmosphere. So they were performing respiration, um, and it was happening outside of the mitochondria at this time in the cytosol, and they were able to produce a little bit of ATP and still do their jobs. As evolution has occurred and we've seen the addition of more complex organisms and additional pieces like our mitochondria, then we can have a more efficient process of making ATP and breaking down energy. So one thing to note. All right, glycolysis. Like I said, we're taking our glucose or taking our sugar and we're going to break it down. So it literally means sugar splitting. Like I talked about, it's connected with our early prokaryotic cells, and it is ancient because it happens in the cytosol and doesn't require those additional components of oxygen at that time. So like I said, we're starting with our glucose molecule, which has 6 carbons, and then it's going to be chopped. So then we have 2 3-carbon molecules, which are called pyruvates, which is an oxidized form of pyruvic acid, if anyone really cares about that. We don't have to know that though. There are kind of 2 steps to glycolysis. There's going to be an investment phase, and then there's going to be a payout phase for ATP, which I'll get into. But in the end, we're going to end up with a net gain of 2 ATP and also 2 NADH molecules. All right. And we'll have the production of some water as well. And like I said, the key part is it occurs whether or not oxygen is present. So any organism that goes through respiration is going to use glycolysis. And then after that, they might have another route, whether it's anaerobic or aerobic in that. So here we go. Like I said, there is going to be glycolysis is split up into 2 phases, the energy investment stage and then the energy payoff stage. So early on in glycolysis, 2 ATP has to be used in order to kind of get that glucose ready to be split in half. And then in the end, there's going to be the energy payoff stage, where we'll have 4 ATP being produced. So it's like giving back some ATP with some interest in there. So we'll end up with 4 total ATP, and that means a net gain of 2, right? So again, like I said, this energy investment stage is the first one. It's going to use that ATP. So ATP is going to drop off electrons to our glucose molecule. And that process of dropping off that energy, ATP converts to ADP and PI, right? So it's called phosphorylating the glucose molecule. But by adding those electrons to glucose, it kind of destabilizes it so that when it hits the reaction centers of glycolysis, glucose is just ready to react and split in half. Okay, so that's that first step. And then stage 2 is the energy payoff stage, and that's where glucose has been split into pyruvate. And for each glucose molecule that goes through glycolysis, we're going to have the net gain of 2 ATP from that, as well as 2 molecules of NADH that have stored those energy pieces. So there's, in your book, in OpenStax, there's kind of a simple version and diagram that goes through the energy input and energy output of glycolysis, which I like. And then there's the really complex version as well that goes through all of the details, which I'll show you in a moment. For our purposes, we want to know the features of glycolysis. We want to know what goes in and what goes out in our ATP electron energy investment stuff, but we don't need to know like all the enzyme names and all of the each reactions that occur. So just be aware of that. It could be more complex, but we don't need it to be. So again, repeating that phosphorylation piece from step 1 in our energy investment phase. So ATP is utilized. It goes through and it's going to have this phosphorylation process onto our glucose molecules. So it's going to strip those, it's going to add, ATP will drop off its energy via electrons, and those electrons will go to the glucose. Then when we're generating ATP later on in the energy payoff phase here, that's where the phosphorylation happens to our ADP molecule and the PI, or the organic phosphate. So it's going to convert it back to ATP, our energy molecule. So that's kind of the process for that. And then sometimes this can happen like, it can be a direct transfer. So there can be an enzyme involved, like I said up here. Instead of it kind of just going through its own natural process, there can be an enzyme that forces that inorganic phosphate, our PI molecule, to interact with ADP so that it happens at a specific time frame, and we're not just waiting around for ATP to be generated. So again, like I said, this is the breakdown. It has 10 steps. And if you look at this, it's crazy, right? It's a cascade of events that's happening for our enzyme process. But if you look at the end of these molecules here, they're all ACEs, right? So we know those are enzymes that are going to speed up the process of this energy investment phase, right? They're going to force ADP and PI to interact and ATP to process to ADP, that sort of thing. And so really, like, this is one of our most important steps here, right? The key step is that processing of ATP to ADP, and that's done with the assistance of an enzyme, okay? This is actually regulated by the allosteric site of their enzymes as well. So just a little side note back to our enzyme information. And then here's our energy payoff phase, again, where our NADH is being produced, and our ATP is being produced as well. So that process of ADP being added with our PI molecules. Again, enzymes are going to assist and force them to interact and happen at a certain time frame. And again, we can see the investment phase 2 ATP in versus 4 ATP are coming out. So our net gain is 2 ATP. That's the main point of this, okay? As well as a little bit of ATP over here. The additional part is water is produced over here. So one of our products is also released during glycolysis. So here it is in summary on the very basic process for glycolysis. And then we kind of want to fill in the blanks, right? So we have this added together. We're going to have 2 ATP produced out here, and then 2 NADH over here, and our water molecule. And then we have our 2 3C molecules called pyruvate in the end as they are broken down. All right.